I only meant to take a 5-minute break. 5 minutes away from fluorescent office lights. From deadlines that smelled like burnt coffee and poorly formatted spreadsheets. The stall door locked. My phone tucked under my chin, and a web novel tab opened. Classic procrastination. Then, the fluorescent buzz blinked into something like candlelight. The toilet bowl shimmered like a cheap portal in a bad movie. And the next thing I knew, I was staring at my own someone else's hand. Silk, nails trimmed into crescent moons. A ring heavy as a rumor. The world lurched. The tile underfoot was warmed by sun and horse hoofs, instead of HVAC, and a voice like an overly excited app notification chimed directly inside my skull. System. Welcome host. Identity linked. Jiang Li. True daughter. Origin. Chapter 1. Of novel Autumn Winds and War Seals. Note. Canonical lifespan. 8 chapters. Objective. Survive beyond canonical endpoint. Newbie gift pack unlocked. Abilities. Eavesdrop passive. Shield temporary. Newbie mall access limited. Restart chance. 1 per narrative arc. Good luck. Good luck. I blinked and tried to be shocked in the appropriate historical way. Gasp. Mutter. Clutch the sleeve but my mouth defaulted to what it knew. Nope. Not today. Modern brain. Modern sarcasm. Silk robe. Ancient catastrophe. My inner voice, which had been used to commenting on character arcs and fan theories, had a new, much higher stakes audience. Me. The system's tech sat in my head like a sticky note. Newbie gift pack. A set of nondescript silk towels, apparently invaluable. A basic medicinal poultice. A tiny silver bell that the system insisted was a quirky nav beacon. The eavesdrop ability unfolded like a cheap spy trick. A soft hum, and then voices. Not sounds from mouths, but thoughts skirting the edges of rooms like moths around lanterns. At first I thought I was hallucinating, then the steward's thought floated past. He mustn't know. If the tally is gone, the minister will slit his throat. And that was when the name minister landed on my tongue like a hot coal. Jiang Li? Daughter of Minister Jiang? True daughter, also, according to the system, canonically hated, underestimated, and fated to die within 8 chapters. Great. I checked the mirror. Like a friend, looking glass and met a face that was not mine, and yet would be mine from now on. A small nose with a stubborn point, eyes that already had learned how not to betray too much, and a mouth that could smile politely or knife. I had to move before anyone noticed I didn't belong, but the mansion was noisy with thoughts everywhere. A chorus of private grievances and public serenades, the housemaid thinking about bribing the head cook for better stew, the third brother composing insults for his sister's back, Jiang Yuan'er, sister in the novel who gleamed like an original heroine pulsing, with something acidic beneath her courtly smiles. She thinks I'm replaceable. Good to know. The system, naturally, was unapologetically chipper. System. Host. Your eavesdrop range. Immediate household. Shield. One-time 30-second barrier. Newbie mall catalog. Now accessible. Tip. Used eavesdrop sparingly. Overuse causes social anomalies. Social anomalies? I repeated. That sounded suspiciously like get caught, which was not the plan. I did the practical things fast, pocketed a towel. Yes, the system literally offered one. No, don't ask how it fits into silk sleeves. Slipped into a servant's corridor, and pretended to be awake when a servant passed me with a tray. The first rule of transmigration. Don't attract attention. The second rule. Use whatever ridiculous advantage you're given, and eavesdropping was a ridiculous advantage. Thoughts drifted in, like loose leaves. Minister Jiang's worry was a heavy stone. The tally is lost. If the tally can't be found, the army's loyalty fractures. The emperor will ask questions. The regent will step in, and someone else's thought brushed it with venom. We must pin this on the minister's house. Good luck, true daughter. 1,000 tiny knives. I needed context, and allies, at least. A towel. The Munchenjungmana was a lattice of polite courtyards, hushed pavilions, and servants' alleys that smelled of oil lamps and wood smoke. Public faces were well practiced, private thoughts were not. That was the beauty and the curse of my new ability. I knew the chorus, but not the motives. Motives still needed parsing. I found my mother in the private garden, pruning a potted tree with the patience of someone who had learned to bury alarms under tea. Her public mask was gentle. Daughter, sleep well? Her private voice was soft, threaded with fear. If only I could do more than smile. The minister, my father, was at the study, fingers hovering over a map, and hairline threads of worry. But his thought flared and then hissed. Protect the family, protect the tally. Someone will pay. Jiang Yuan, in the guest hall, bright as a courtly portrait, her thoughts were a scavenger hunt. Must maintain favor. Don't let her hear a flicker of genuine fear. Expose what I did in the nursery. She wrapped her hands around her ceremonial fan and smiled at me like a sun with barbs. I had to be careful. In a world where people's private monologues could be plucked like pearls, the most dangerous thing was the truth itself. If I performed too cleverly, they'd think me a scheming prodigy. If I performed poorly, I'd be rearranged into a footnote or something worse. So I began with small things. Small wins were underrated. A towel that tasted like dignity. A poultice that might stop a fever from becoming a death certificate. The system's newbie mall felt shamelessly like a gotcha shop inside my skull. I could spend host points earned by surviving awkward conversations and not dying on items. I hoarded nothing but pragmatic fluff. A thicker robe, a spare coin, and a plain ribbon the color of decisiveness. System. Newbie gift pack includes 1x absorbent towel, 1x basic poultice, 1x navigation bell cosmetic. Newbie mall. Access level. I host points and 4. 1 avoiding suspicion. To stabilizing household discord. Avoiding suspicion earned me nothing but breath. But that was enough for now. I tested the eavesdrop. It was like mental radio static with a switch. When I stood at the threshold of the breakfast hall, I could hear a current of thoughts, smiles, and pretended hunger from noble guests. A blade of anxiety in the steward's mind, an undercurrent of contempt for my eldest brother that smelled like coal. I listened and catalogued, without comment, the private voice of the fourth brother, excited and cruel, whispered a rumor. If the tally is found under Jiang Li's cushion, the minister is ruined. I pressed my palms flat to the fan carved with cloud motifs. Perfect. Someone wanted a scapegoat. The next step proved I wasn't that scapegoat, without looking like a paranoid child. Opportunity showed up like a pig in a parlor. The household was ordered to assist in a search. The emperor's military talitha, symbol of command, a sealed token, had gone missing. A missing tally was more than paperwork. It was a rumor that could split loyalties. Dozens of servants scurried, the courtyard filled with muddied feet and anxious oxen of men. I heard each pair of feet before I saw them. The steward's resigned tread, the second brother's impatient march, and a new, careful padding that wasn't supposed to be there. Someone had been inside the manor who shouldn't have been. Jiang Li. My brother's thought snapped at me like a leash. He assumed I was dull. I smiled the harmless smile of a woman not yet on the chopping block and drifted toward where the servants were called to sweep the pigsty. People searched the usual spots: pillowcases, ledger boxers, the minister's study. Someone joked about how the tally was probably tripping on its own. The joke landed like a wooden spoon. The pigsty was a disgrace in the day's bright sun. It reeked of straw and forgotten dinners, and the pigs snuffled with a dignity I envied. The second prince, who according to rumor mill, and the system's occasional footnote, was always scheming things with the court's less savory elements, had been seen near the estate in a disguised coach. No one spoke his name in the manor. Rather, his presence was a rumor, like a dog's whine. But my eavesdrop picked him out. Disguised, nervous, laughing to himself about how easily the minister could be toppled. He emerged from the pigsty like a scandal in muddy silk. One of the palace messengers, his face red from exertion, his thoughts a cluttered archive. My master will be pleased. The master will blame the Jiang house. And theirs. Small and bright, an unfamiliar thought crashed into my head. Don't forget. The tally in my coat. My stomach dropped. Someone had literally walked away with the military tally in a coat pocket. Right under our noses. That promised immediate and violent consequences. If the household found the messenger alone and he blamed the Jiang family, Minister Jiang would be fingered. The forest of court politics would set its teeth. It was exactly the kind of scene in which Cain and Jiang Li did not survive. We had to act. But the pigsty was a mess, and no one wanted to get their silk soiled, especially not Madame Yuan. The steward sulk helped. Toward cowardice. If I touch him, I'm fired. The head of the guard fretted about who to arrest without causing a scene. Eavesdropping gave me the who, but not the power to reach into pockets. That was when the system, predictably, offered the sort of assistance that was both practical and annoying. An on-screen chime that only I could hear. System. Suggestion. Distract the messenger. Use shield to conceal hosts while retrieving tally. Risked. Social oddness. If overused. Reward. Host points. Evidence secured. I evaluated. The shields, 30 seconds, were a gimmick. But 30 seconds is a lot when a human is stuffing a tally into a coat. I used it. The shield shimmered like heat and not like magic, an excuse for the way servants looked at me with a hint of pity as I stooped to pick up a dropped feeding scoop. Under the shield, I moved, lungs full of piggery and determination. The messenger was fumbling, manual dexterity ruined by nervous fingers. I slipped my hand into the loose hem of his coat, a move that, in a different life, would have been thrillingly illegal, and my fingers closed around cold metal and lacquer. The tally was heavier than I expected, and the letters carved into it were a promise of bone and loyalties. I pulled it free and tucked it into my sleeve before anyone noticed. The system pinged with approval. System. Plus 15 host points. Tally retrieved. Suggested next action. Present tally in noble fashion to control narrative. Don't be dramatic, I told the system silently. We're not solving politics. We're not decorating the courtyard. We need to not get killed. I walked back into the courtyard with my hands folded like a statue, and thought, calmly. The tally was in my sleeve. A servant's mind brushed my thought and recoiled in shock. She knows. She took it. The hush was a physical thing. Zhang Yuan's thought splintered into a curious blend. Suspicion, calculation, and panic. If the rival sister's inner monologue could panic, it happened now. Jiang Li. Someone said aloud, and there was a heat to it that was not the sun's. The steward's eyes darted to the messenger's coat, then to me. My pulse was a metronome. I produced the tally, as politely as one produces a pardon. This was missing, I said. voice as formal as the embroidered hem. It belongs to the emperor. It should be returned. Publicly returning. The tally was theater. People loved the theater. People loved the comfort of a tidy explanation. The steward's thought read like a prayer. If this settles, then perhaps we can breathe. He bowed and accepted the token, as though accepting a truth. The messenger, still in a fever of guilt, tried to speak, but his thoughts were a jumble about being used, and about his master's wrath. He stammered, and accused at the minister with a voice that smelled of panic. The courtyard grew sharp. I couldn't show too much knowledge of anyone's inner thought. The maid who'd been sweeping the steps had a thread of thought. She saw her. She saw her take it that collided with her sensibilities. She looked at me as though she had witnessed something improper. I tried to smile and offered her the ribbon from my newbie mole as a bribe for discretion. It was a small thing, but polite bribery is the oldest diplomacy. The tally's return quelled immediate accusations. For the moment, Minister Jiang's household sailed on a fragile barge of plausible deniability. But I had a secret now. The messenger thought of a master who wanted the tally to be gone. A political hand was at work at the edges. My act had prevented a pylon, but it also painted a target on me. Someone had seen me move where no one should. Rumors are lances. Someone will use this. That night, after the household slept, in the measured quiet of a house that pretended nothing serious had happened, I sat on the window ledge and listened to a dozen private worries ripple like tea steam into the air. The system tapped me like an impatient child. System. Host points. 30. Suggestion. Build alliances. Suggestion. Speak with Regent Saitu. U4 protection. Note. Saitu. U. Aliases. Situyu. Saitu. Zulan. Saitu. Jianbai. Recommended canonical name. Saitu. U. Saitu U. The name felt like a stone in my mouth, cool and heavy. The system insisted on canonical names, the way a map insists on borders. The regent had been mentioned in the minister's thoughts earlier, a neutral force who leaned whoever the narrative made more necessary. He was the kind of person whose favor could rewrite fates. Getting his notice meant either ascending, or being noticed by someone who might use you as a chess piece. I didn't know how to approach a regent. I barely knew how to approach a man in the same room long enough to borrow his sleeve. Instead, I did what I did best. I listened, and that meant listening to the stuff of the house. A maid's shame at overhearing me, a brother's low-burning jealousy, a mother's quiet prayer. The maid, Lianyes, name slipped into my head as if from a ledger was the first to register that I had knowledge she did not. She didn't point it out in the morning. She only watched me and folded her hands like she was measuring whether I was safe to trust. Trust would come later. For now, I needed to make my knowledge useful, in a way that didn't scream witchcraft. The next morning, the palace sent a courier. A notice that the emperor had fallen ill after taking a new medicine. Poisoning, whispered the courtyards, like a rumor taking wing. The emperor was not yet dead, but he was unwell enough that the court's most practiced faces tightened, that shrank the circle of safety for every noble house because, in times of sickness, every finger pointed to any house with motive. There it is! The thing that accelerates destiny. In the novels? This was the scene that hastened doom. In my chest, a cold, practical thought landed. If I want to survive past chapter 8, I have to be useful enough to be kept alive, and small enough to not be needed as a scapegoat. I decided to be useful. I polished my face with the towel until my fingers ached. And then, because I was neither a brave heroine nor a fool, I did something borderline reckless. I walked into the inner courtyard, where the doctors had been summoned. Their faces were the color of old paper. Their thoughts were a library of herbs and bones. The head physician muttered about bitter root and the wrong stewing, thinking, We need to know who prepared the medicine. There was an opening. The head physician's mind brushed against a scrap of a thought. The messenger, he tasted like burnt sesame. I knew the messenger. The servant who'd returned the tally was thin, and had a nervous mouth. His coat had tasted of hemp and straw. It could be nothing. It could be everything. How is the emperor? I asked. Eyes careful. Voice like a practiced alarm clock. The physician's thought folded into a curt, professional distance. He's stable for now, but he was also thinking. If the poisoning is confirmed, it will be treated as murder. We need samples. We need to test the herbs. We need witnesses who can show chain of custody. Chain of custody. Evidence. A trail. All I had were the messenger's thoughts, and the tally's gratitude in my sleeve. But I had something else, too. Footprints. The courtyard at dawn was damp with river mist. Mud clung to brick. The courtyard's floor, though swept, kept secrets in the shallow depressions footprints left. A walk with eavesdrop, and a careful step or two later, and I realized the messenger's steps had a peculiar print. His sandals had a carved lotus at the heel, a sign perhaps of the palace Esarasa Messenjas. But someone else had been there recently. Footprints told stories if you knew how to read them. Stride length, pressure, direction, pause. They told whether a person ran in fear or strolled with purpose. The messenger's prints were hurried. The second princes were careful. Someone had come and gone. Someone with a limp had paused near the physician's herb chest. This was detective work in a silk sleeve. I compared prints with a spare cloth. The depth suggested weight distribution common to someone carrying something heavy, perhaps a token. The spacing matched a messenger. But the heel mark suggested a custom sole. It was small, but in a world full of masks, small things were evidence. I asked the head physician, politely, if he'd allow me to observe the medicine. He arched an eyebrow. Nobles don't meddle in physicians' duties, even if they are daughters. But his thought, when the eavesdrop reached me, was resigned. The more eyes the better. He let me lean over the herbs, and sniff piles of powdered roots. My modern brain knew nothing about ancient apothecaries, beyond dramatic television, but I had a basic poultice from the system's gift pack, which, mercifully, told me that the bitter root they had on the emperor's spoon should have a bright, peppery scent. If genuine, the medicine I smelled had an acrid tangrong root, or tempered. There is a line in detective stories where the amateur notices a detail the professionals missed. It's usually accompanied by a swell of violins. I had none of that. I had a tiny bell in my pouch from the system that jingled embarrassingly when I walked. But I also had an eye for the suspicious. The way the physician tried to hide the medicine's original jar under a cushion, the way a maid's thought flicked with guilt, the way the courtyard's footprint near the herb chest matched none of the household's regular steps. I made a plan that was either brilliant or stupid. Publicly accusing someone would be madness. Instead, I set a test. Footprints could be matched. If the palace messenger's prints matched a set of prints found on the floor of a carriage, if the same heel mark was on both, then the carriage's owner might be implicated. But I needed to get a sample of prints without raising suspicion. The palace kitchens had a stoop where messengers came and went. I pretended to be making tea by the servants' gate, while Liane, the maid, who had eyes like ledger entries, pretended to be polishing bowls. We watched the courtyard's morning traffic in silence, and I listened to the parade of internal thoughts. Which route is fastest? Who suspects? How to hide? Leon's thoughts were a constant tape loop. She could do this. She could help. She could not be caught. We timed it. When the messenger returned to the manse to collect more orders, he left a distinct set of prints imprinted in the soft mud. By the stable's prints that included the lotus heel, Lian, under my hand signal, followed, and, when the messenger went to the back of the coach, She trailed behind him, and pressed a damp strip of cloth to the imprint on the wheel's lip. The cloth took up the mud like a thumbprint, and we had a copy of a footprint. It wasn't forensic science by any modern standard, but it was close for a courtyard used to secrets. I compared the print with the one near the herb chest. The heel pattern matched. The depth suggested the same stride. The conclusion was clear enough. Someone had been in the herb chest and had recently left the carriage that the messenger used. We had a lead. Not proof. Not an arrest. A lead. But leads scare plotting men more than proofs. Leads are like rumors, they spread and make people twitch. Rumors traveled faster than good intentions. By noon, whispers slid through the manor like quicksilver. The emperor's medicine had strange roots. A carriage was seen near the compound at odd hours. Someone had stolen a tally, and returned it in a delicate hand. Servants' minds circled the suggestion like flies. If Jiang Li had the tally, she must like to perform theatrics. If Jiang Li befriended a maid, perhaps they shared secrets. A meddlesome aunt suggested that perhaps I had friends in strange places. Jiang Yuaner. Thought rippled with glee. That made me shiver. This will be useful. For once, I had to outmaneuver someone who'd been canonically polished to be a star in the novel's narrative. She was practiced and hungry. She wanted the regent's attention as much as I maybe did. But she wanted it cleanly. My interference made things messy, in ways she could exploit. The first person to voice suspicion aloud was a Kuzana thin, long whispering boy named Jiang Li. His thought had a soft prickle of resentment. He liked the idea of blame being a spectator sport. He asked a question in the dining hall loud enough for family to hear. Who actually saw the tally returned? The room frosted. People's faces became crisp masks again. The steward's thought was a storm. If they ask, I must recall the chain. The head guard's thought had a thunder under it. Keep calm. The maid Leon's hands clicked in my direction like nervous birds. She could not be found out. I answered as though I were shifting a cloud. I returned it to the steward this morning during the search. I watched faces like glass. Some were smudged with relief, some, particularly Jiang Yuanori's, wore a map of recalculating lines. That evening, when the household fell into the blue hush of lamplight, a slender woman waiting in the corridor pulled me aside. Madame Zhu, my wet nurse's sister. And a woman with the eyes of someone who had kept many secrets, she said, quietly. The kind of thing a mother says to a child before the child learns to walk. You know too much, child. You mean, you noticed I know about the messenger? I asked. Her laugh was short and bitter. I saw you reach his sleeve. I saw Lian's hands tremble when she pressed that cloth. You saved honor today. But do you think this makes you safe? I could have lied. I could have pretended I hadn't eavesdropped. But Madame Zhu was not a woman for theatrics. Her thoughts, which brushed cooling tea and the shape of grandchildren, carried a loyalty fossilized into protective habits. She told me instead, when a person knows what no one else knows, people will try to hold them to that thing. Your life is tied now to what you reveal. It was a kindness and a threat. She left me with a hand on my wrist, as if to measure my pulse. Keep your head down, she murmured. Make yourself useful in a manner that doesn't threaten others to protect you. Useful, not threatening. The next day's news made useful suddenly redefined. A messenger arrived at dawn with a royal dispatch. The emperor's condition had worsened overnight. The court was assembling. The regent Saitu, as the system preferred to call him, would be there to oversee council. In times like these, the court's gaze was like a catapult. Favor and suspicion could both be flung in short order. The minister paced like a caged tiger. His thoughts were bladed and angry and raw. Who is behind this? If it's a palace plot, we must distance ourselves. He kept looking at me, as though checking whether I'd maintain the charade of normalcy, or shatter into accusations. He leaned toward me at one private moment and said, voice clipped like a blade, "Daughter, do not make waves." I understood the hint. Standing out was lethal. Standing out and saving people might earn a reprieve, but it also painted me brighter for knives. I had to perform a small, useful act, in plain sight, to be documented, to be witnessed, to be accounted for in a ledger where my name was not a footnote. The council was scheduled for noon. They would gather at the palace. I had two things: a heap of gossiped prints, pointing to a carriage, and a head full of overheard thoughts that suggested a man in a coach with a tally. I had also, painfully, the sense that if I did nothing, the novel's fate chapter doom would like to swallow me in its jaws. So, I did the most reckless, sensible thing I could think of. I sought an audience with the regent. It was not because the system recommended it, with stars and fanfare. It was because the regent's very name had a gravity that anchored rumors. If Saitu noticed me and thought me worth defending, he'd force the court to reevaluate the shape of blame. The risky part: how to get the regent's attention without making it look like I wanted to be noticed. The palace gate smelled of dust and incense. The imperial hall was a place of statues and long shadows, where a whisper could weigh as much as a spear. The regent sat like a mountain, exiled into a human's frame, dark hair, braided like rules, eyes that were always measuring. He glanced at me with a look that was not curiosity but calculation. His thoughts were a cave. This is interesting. Watch her. I bowed, because that's what living in a body taught me. My eavesdrop pinged, with the regent's alias catalog, Saitu Yu, also known as Situ Yu, Saitu, Sulan, Saitu, Jian. I layered the system's parenthetical in my head like a footnote. The canonical regent had a look like the end of a sentence. He was not demonstrative. He was a man of small, deadly favors. One chose my moment, when the council's attention was on facts, and not drama. I stepped forward, hands folded, and offered what I knew. Footprints compared, carriage noted, the messenger's coat and its smell. I spoke as if I were lecturing about teapots. I did not mention thoughts. I mentioned mud, heel patterns, and a matching imprint on a wheel hub. I pushed the cloth sample into the regent's hands, and let him feel the mud. He lifted the sample, and his gloved thumb traced the lotus heel. No emotion flickered on his face, but his eyes narrowed in a promise. He asked, politely, to whom the carriage belonged. I said I didn't know, only that the prints matched the footprint by the herb chest. The physician's mouth clicked. The council's attention turned. Saituyu's thought brushed against me like a careful hand. You have courage. Use it wisely. He then spoke aloud in that silent, steady voice that made courtiers lean forward. Chain of evidence is valuable. Let there be a proper inquiry. Let us not leap on the minister without proof. A murmured gratitude swept the minister's shoulders like wind, moving a banner. The regent had not yet promised safety. He had suggested delay in process, It was enough, for now. Enough to dim the immediate gleam of accusation. After the council, as people filtered out like moths from a lantern, I felt eyes on me, a lazy malice from Jiang Li, a curiosity sharpened in Zhang Yuaner, a protective spark in my mother's thought. Madame Zhu's hand found mine in the corridor and squeezed. She did not need to ask how it had gone. "What now?" she asked with the patience of a woman used to pressing bruises into the shape of bread. I thought, keep doing what we do. Make yourself useful, without making conspirators look stupid. Keep ears open, keep feet in mud. The system chimed, almost as if it had been listening in. System. Host points. 60. Suggestion. Saitu. You shows interest, social capital gained. Caution. Increased exposure raises suspicion from rival factions. Tip. Harvest allies quietly. Harvest allies quietly. That was a farmer's proverb. I had no desire to be strung up on the square for being a particularly inconvenient daughter, yet something in me warmed at the idea of being useful to a person like Saitu. The regent's neutral favor could be a cliff of safety, or a cliff into attention. The difference was subtle. That night, dinner was formal. The family's faces were calm varnishes, over a churn of private thoughts. One of the younger brothers, who had previously been all swagger, ate little and glared more. Jiang Yuano sat with a smile that had sharpened edges. The steward tried to recover some normalcy. Lian moved silently, eyes on me, mouth set like an oath. And somewhere inside the house, a servant's kaleidoscopic thought turned into something else. She saw Jiang Li seize a piece of evidence, and not panic. She started thinking, foolishly, wildly. Maybe she is not what we thought. Maybe she is something else. A servant saying one thing is not a scandal. A servant telling another servant is a rumor. A rumor is a thing that, if given time and a push, will become a part of the household's lore. The first tiny crack appeared, not with a shout, but with a folded sheet in a little hand. A maid that had watched me reach into that messenger's sleeve mentioned to another maid that perhaps I had a talent for noticing things. And then, as if the world liked theatrics, a courier arrived at the door with the palace seal. The emperor had worsened overnight. This time, the message was not a rumor. It arrived with the urgency of an axe. The courtyard burst into motion. The courtyard's mud groaned as servants scrambled. The minister's mind became a furnace of plans. Saitu's presence was announced almost silently, like a shadow rearranging the furniture of the day. His face was paler than the incense smoke. He moved like someone who touched chess pieces, without trying to feel the wood. I felt a pressure like a hand on my back. Eyes looking for me to perform. The house needed to show allegiance, to be useful, to be loyal. I also felt something else needle-pointing, through the eavesdrop hum. The whisper of a plan. A thin, cold thing. Someone in the court had more than motive, they had precision. And precision means someone who knows how to set fires without being burned. Madame Zhu's hand on my wrist was a small, private weight. "Stay close to the physician," she said. "Stay quiet." And her thought cut across mine like a blade. If someone is stupid enough to come for you, do not run. She left me with those last words, which tasted both like a blessing and a premonition. The courtyard's noise swelled. The regent's figure was already moving toward the gate, and with him, the entire court. My head filled with scenarios, each a possible ending. The system, as if to punctuate my rising heartbeat, pinged one last time. System. New objective unlocked. Protect family, and secure truth behind Emperor's illness. Danger level, escalating. Reminder. Host points can be exchanged for items consider later. Good luck, host. Good luck. The words made my teeth itch. Luck was slim currency, preparation was the real coin. I tucked another towel into my sleeve because preparedness has a beautiful, practical face. The house hummed with 1,000 private thoughts, some kind, most not. The regent's silhouette receded into the palace, and with him went hope for slow, rational inquiry. We followed. The regent's silhouette pulled the palace's shadows taut like a curtain, and everything that hinted at order in that hall, statues, banners, the slow ceremonial tick of officials, suddenly felt brittle. I followed on the edge of the group. A small cloth with mud, still smudged in my sleeve, and the system hummed, like an impatient fly. System. Objective active. Public demonstration of evidence increases host points significantly. Risk. Heightened attention from rival factions. Reminder. Use discretion. Discretion is my new worst enemy. We entered the inner audience chamber. The emperor lay propped on a dais, beneath robes that did their best to act like armor. His face, however, betrayed a kingdom's worry instead of a ruler's composure. Physicians shuffled with the horrible grace of men who know what could happen but don't know how to stop it. I caught a thin, sour tang in the air-burnt sesame, a detail I'd already stored like an unwelcome memory. The head physician bowed at the regent, and then at me, with a level of resigned politeness that suggested he'd rather be wiping tears. "My lord," he said to Saitu, voice steady and small as vellum. "We have isolated irregular compounds in his medicine, either deliberate tampering or a tragic mislabeling." The regent's eyes slid over me once, twice, then landed in a way that felt less like attention than appraisal. I swallowed dry, and offered the cloth sympatha. One Lian had pressed to the wheel's hub flat, on my palm, like a petition. "This," I said, voice steady thanks to a lifetime of public presentations, and a single, stubborn wish to remain alive, much as the tread near the physician's herb chest. Someone who handled the emperor's medicine left the same imprint. A murmur circulated like wind caught between tents. The head physician's mouth tightened. Courtiers leaned in because courts are living things and living things crave drama like food. Saitu, you put a gloved finger on the mud print with a deliberateness that made me want to step back. He glanced at the wheel sample, then at the physician, and gave me the smallest, almost invisible nod version of a hand extended across an abyss. "Have the gods bring forward the carriage used by the palace messenger who delivered items to this residence yesterday," he ordered. "Bring the men as well. Orders are surprising things when those giving them have no use for theater." Gods moved. The chamber's air grew heavy with watching eyes, and the small, sharp edge of expectation. The second prince's name circled the thought ether like something hungry. I felt it like static. He was not yet accused, but he bore the same rumor weight as a thunderhead. The messenger arrived, breathless, dragged in by two guards, whose hands were too practiced at delivering men to judgment. He looked like a man whose life had been reduced to a series of apologies. His coat smelled like hemp and mud and, faintly, the sesame I'd already learned to notice. He kept glancing at me like a man who knew there would be a ledger one day and he would be an entry. "Where did you get this carriage?" the regent asked, voice steady, and a blade wrapped in velvet. The messenger's thoughts scattered when he tried to answer fear. The taste of being small before an accusation, loyalty strained into knots. Out loud he said, "From the palace stables." "My lord, I only drive four." "For whom?" the regent interjected. His eyes were a crossbow. The messenger stammered names, small names, technician and steward names that meant little in a council hall until a cleaner, a palace boy, was brought forward. He recognized the crest on the wheel. "It belonged," he said, "to a coach often used by a certain second prince's retinue." My stomach dropped like a stone into a well. Coincidence dissolves quickly in courts. Pattern gleams. "Search the retinue, Saitu," you said. "We will find the carriage owner." They left to tear through the prince's retinue, with the quiet of men who handle fragile things. I could feel the hull contracting into a string around the minister's neck. The minister's thought protect the tally pumped. Like a bell, my father's eyes found mine for a half breath. There was gratitude there, but it was thin and bound in worry. Then the emperor's breath hitched. A spasm shuddered across his face. And for a moment the entire hall held its breath, as if it were a thing that could be wrong. The physicians dropped to checking pulse and lips, with hands that belonged to surgeons and poets of different temperaments. The emperor did not fall, he did not die. But he paled. The world wanted to tilt. Bring the original batch, the head physician demanded, meaning the exact jar, the sealed container whose chain of custody would explain everything, if it were honest, and a cup of the medicine as it was given. Servants went at once. I held my breath because the test would be public. If the medicine could be tested, who prepared it could be named. If not, rumors would be the only law. That latter was death for us. A cup arrived. The physician sniffed, pinched, and frowned. I watched the head physician as one watches a weathered map in a storm. He tasted carefully, grimaced, then sniffed again. He lifted it the way someone lifts a secret. His eyes flicked to me. Who else handled the jars? He asked, almost conversational, as if asking who had borrowed a teacup. The question dug like a spade. Thoughts pooled in the room like rain. Servants' interior voices told of wristbands and mortar and pestle, of hands that tied secret knots into the labels. In the swirl, one thought blazed by me like a match struck too fast. He knew it would be tested. He covered the jar with his coat. In the courtyard my mind narrated. The eavesdrop, catching the edges. I saw the image, brief and bright. A hand, a coat, a small face, not the messenger's. Someone else, a eunuch, a likeness of loyal service, wrapped in deceit. The thought dissolved, like glass. I said the picture out loud before I could stop myself. Sameoneing. Unukoes. Ataya handled the jar in the courtyard last night. The room paused. Public attention snapped to me like silk catching on a nail. The head physician's brow climbed. You saw this? No, I lied, at first, less a lie, and more like a tight, careful omission. But there were footprints near the hub chest that matched the carriage wheel. The jar was moved. Someone with access carried it. The regent's eyes narrowed. He had the terrible patience of a man who listens for a long time before choosing to act. Such the eunuchs who attended to the emperor. He ordered, bring anyone who had access to his apothecary. That should have been enough, to let the guard do the rest. They moved with the efficiency of men used to following instructions that altered lives. The room melted into a buzz of quiet. I felt, for a moment, undeservedly heroic, until a guard returned with a man in plain livery, not quite a eunuch but a kitchen attendant, who'd been seen near the emperor's quarters. He was sweating, hands trembling, eyes too bright. He claimed, out loud and in his thoughts, that he had simply been paid in coins to take a sealed jar from the palace repository to the emperor's chamber. His words trembled. His secret, half finished. The head physician uncorked the jar, and smelled stiffened. It matched the medicine previously drunk. He frowned like a man solving a puzzle that broke his heart. This has a bitter root, adulterated with an oil that would mask a poison's scent. Someone wanted it to be misread. The messenger, who had been held at the edge of the room like a moth outside a lantern, suddenly gasped and turned his head toward my father. His eyes cut with the specific aim of someone trying to survive by offering another's head. My lord, he said, voice thin. My master, he told me, the tally must vanish. He said the Jiang household would be blamed. Accusation is a thing that lands faster than fact. The hall curled tighter around the minister like a trap. Faces shifted into modes of interest and predation. JiangYuanOrs.com, earlier powered by mere bright ambition, finally cracked at the edges. Was something not unlike triumph. Her thought rippled with serve-hemand. The rest was calculation. My father's face went pale enough to match the emperor's robes. The minister's thought was a flint struck in a dark room. If this is true, we are ruined. The regent's hand rested on the hilt of a decision. He glanced at me, and I felt the air move around me like a tide. Who is his master? He asked the messenger. The messenger swallowed. His eyes darted, settling on nothing like a man starved of sleep. He said, quietly, A retainer of the second prince. There it was, delivered in a breath. Sounds like thunder. The court shifted. The second prince's name was a rust on old armor people, spoken in the same hush as debts. The regent did not lash out with accusation. He moved with the slow economy of a man who could split a mountain with a word and chose instead to schedule. This matter will be investigated, he pronounced. No action will be taken against the minister until we have the full account. It was a lifeline wrapped in protocol. Not full safety, but safety is rarely absolute in this life. People exhaled in the hall like wind, moving a sail. Then, because the universe likes its ironies, the head physician faltered in his steps. He made a small motion, the kind of thing that seems almost accidental, until someone notices. And his hand found the emperor's pulse. He felt the emperor's skin. Something in his expression shifted. Caution stepped into alarm. He's losing color, he said. And then, quieter, to the regent. We need to stabilize him. Quickly, the physicians closed in. Herbs and ointments, arranged like a prayer. They began to work with the concentrated precision of people who answer to life and death, and know how small the difference can be. I watched and listened, noting the herbs they used, the ways they wrapped bandages, the precise sequence of steps. Knowledge is currency. I stored every scrap. When the head physician looked at me, his thought was a ragged, hopeful thing. She is small and foolish, but she sees things. Use that. It was the temptation I had been hoping for, an opening to be useful in a public, undeniable way. I fished the basic poultice from the towel in my sleeve. The one the system insisted was basic, and therefore potentially miraculous. It smelled faintly of bitter herbs, an adhesive hope. If I may, I said, and the physician, after measuring me with the kind of look that checks whether you're poison or remedy, let me draw close. They handed me poultice recipes, jars, and the clean linen set. The head physician's instructions were brisk, not condescending. Apply a poultice of this mix to the emperor's temples, he directed. We need to draw out the toxin while maintaining body heat. I worked with shaking hands, and a singed, focused calm. The poultice spread like mud and moss. It smelled wrong in the way of things patched together, but it had a property, a coolness and bitterness that felt right. I applied it, the cloth pressing against robes that smelled of incense and old power. The effect was not instant. Medicine rarely makes for fairy tales, but a slow easing came, like tide returning after a fever. The emperor straightened fractionally, the head physician observed with a professional's eyes, and then a faint nod. Sigh too. Use thought gaze. Found me again. There was, for the first time since he'd looked in council, a fraction of something that might have been approval. He left the council with the physician at his side. In the doorway he said, low enough for only me to hear, you did well. Remain careful. Remain careful. The words sank into me like a cautionary coin. Useful acts buy you time. Time in courts is a currency you don't waste. Outside the palace, things were quieter, but no less dangerous. News scattered like ash on wind. The second prince's retinue had been searched. A carriage, found with a small hidden compartment, contained a fragment of cloth, with a pattern belonging to a known supplier of poisons, rumored to be favored by certain ambitious courtiers. Evidence for fingers of eye pulled toward a name. Still, none of that explained how someone could move through our house, and how I had noticed. That thread would into family later, and later, was not far. Back at the mansion, the household pulsed with rumors like a hive. The steward paced in a way that suggested internal calculation. What to tell the town? What to hide? What to reveal? The servants' gossip wheel turned along small grooves. Liane watched me like a person watching a candle that might set a house on fire. Night fell like wet silk. Family dinners are strange, ceremonial things. They are less about food and more about who sits where and who watches whose face. We gathered, though the meal was thin, and full of the kind of polite talk people use when they pretend claws are not under their sleeves. The first crack came not with thunder but with a quiet, impossible question from Jiang Li softly, like a boy rehearsing an accusation. "How did you know to bring that cloth to the regent?" he asked, voice at once innocent and aimed. There it was. The small, jagged wedge pried into place. My father's head turned, the minister's face a map of worry. "Explain, daughter," he said, half command, half plea. I could have lied, I could have spun a tale of observation and improbable deduction, but the truth had grown heavy on me. It had weight in the way you inherit a burden you can no longer set aside. I watched, I said. I listened to the courtyard, and followed footprints. Lian pressed the cloth to the wheel. I offered it to the regent. Zhang Yuan. A smile did something like settle into a weapons-bearing posture. She asked, polite as a blade. You watched people's steps, and you listened to gossip. That is not unusual. But you spoke of things only someone who was there would know. Her thought flicked with something sharp if only for a second. Her eyes burned with the precise hunger of someone who'd always wanted to be in the brighter light. It's not how it looks, I said quickly. I had been rehearsing this in my head like a line of defense. I used the eavesdrop in the house to catch the messenger's intentions. I used the shield to get the tally. That's it. Madame Zhu, who had been watching us with an expression like someone who holds several stories of the past in her ribs, stepped forward. You used that thing we said. Talent, she said, not unkind. Her hands were steady, as if holding a ladle. It saved the minister today. But you must know people fear what they do not understand. Her words landed like a balance being set. It is one thing for servants to suspect you of being clever. It is another for your family to know you move with access to what they conceal. Fear is not always scorn. It can be a kind of mourning the knowledge that the person you thought you held is different in a way that changes how you see them. A maid, one of the younger ones who had seen me reach for the messenger's code, spoke then in a voice that trembled. I saw her hand. I saw her take the tally. I thought it was to be proud. Her gaze flicked to Lian. Lian saw her with the cloth. We thought it was brave. My daughter pulled a man's sleeve, my mother said. A note of incredulity and something's. It was difficult to tell a mother's heart from a household strategy. She did why. Would you do that? Do you understand the danger? You told me to be useful? The words came out sharper than I intended. I felt, suddenly, like a small animal in a thunderstorm of familial expectations. My oldest brother, Jiang Li, whose earlier jealousy had been a simmer shifted. And the part about listening to thoughts, he asked. Not fully masked. As curiosity now. You mean, you hear what people think. It's absurd. The way the mind tries to accept impossible things, when the risk is high. My mother's eyes softened, and then knitted with worry as her mind ran a dozen steps ahead like a careful planner. If she does, she said, voice trembling between relief and fear, it could be used to defend us, or it could be used to doom us. The room went quiet enough to hear the chiming of the system bell in my pocket if it were not a private little joke of fate. The sister, sensing drama, pinged like a commentator on a radio show. Sister. Noted. Family exposure achieved. Recommend calibration of disclosures. Reward. plus 40 host points. Tip. Public admission will alter family dynamics significantly. Public admission. The words pressed into me like a choice between two doors. Lie and live with a dangerous secret alone, or tell and face being a spectacle. I could feel the fabric of the household contorting around this new truth-protective hands, curious eyes, knife fingers. I chose neither a full confession nor a smothered secret. I hear fragments, I said carefully. Not everything, mostly impressions, fears, and urgings. It's not like reading a book, it's like hearing a radio that sticks to certain channels. Jiang Li's expression split like an old photograph. For a second there was nothing but a woman calculating whether the new variable could make her climb higher. Then she sucked air through her teeth, like someone biting into an unsweetened fruit. If you can hear us, she said, voice the kind that keeps knives in its pockets, then you can expose whatever you want. Who says you will not use it to ruin me? That landed like salt. People who had secrets always fear the quietest among them, because silence can be weaponized. But the tenderness of the moment surprised me. My mother's hand reached for mine, and for a second we were not a political house, but a family that had quietly rearranged the pain in its chest to make room for fear. You used to be little enough to hide, she said, voice catching. And now you are a thing that sees. Useful things are fickle, Madame Zeus said, grim as a midwinter wind. They are kept close for protection, they are shown slowly. A household shows a blade to friends, and hides it from those who would use it against them. Most of my family, Nestle, the ones who weren't plotting full-fledged coups, in the nitrioctid shades of bewildered calculation. My father's worry streaked across his face in a way that looked like someone trying to redraw a map mid-battle. He moved his chair closer to me and spoke, quieter than before. Daughter, you must be careful. If the court deems this unnatural, we are vulnerable. I know, I said, which is why I want to. I stopped because there is an intimate, dangerous hush in the way people look. When you say you want to change a fate, they need to be convinced. Leon, who had been silent, and whose hands had trembled, barely visibly, stepped forward with a look of something between defiance and relief. I helped, she blurted out before anyone could stop her. I pressed the cloth. I saw her take the tally. She saved us today. A maid's testimony sounds like courtesy, Jiang Li said, scorn easy on his tongue. What we need is proof. His thought carried petulance, wrapped in the desire to be needed. Proof. Proof is a neat, righteous thing, except that in houses like ours, proof is often the last thing anyone wants to produce. Because proof changes how people love you and wield you. I had a different idea. We would show them the proof together. Bring the steward, I said. The steward blinked, and then, confused and perhaps curious, obeyed. His eyes were like pages that had seen too much ink. I asked him to describe, in the room, his experience of the courtyard that morning. He stuttered at first, but then spoke. The messenger, the return of the tally, the furtive look he'd seen, and that odd moment where a maid had looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. No one expected the steward to name an inner thought. He could only report outward actions. So I did the thing that no one in my family could deny. I listened. Their thoughts drifted in small and jagged. The steward thought, I cannot say this aloud, about being terrified of blame. Jiang Li tossed around the idea of aligning with whomever protected them. My mother thought of the recipes her own mother had taught her for calming fevers, and then sharp and unbidden came a thought that was not like the others. The minister thinking, if the truth comes out that my daughter can hear thoughts, I have to be ready to leverage it. My lips had not moved. I did not repeat anything from memory. I simply said, as plainly as I could, Steward, you were thinking, earlier, that if blame falls on us, you would not survive the shame. The steward's face crumpled like paper read aloud. He opened his mouth, and then shut it. The room went colder in an instant. This, in a family already frayed, was a blow. He knew I could hear him right now. That was proof not a ragged cloth, or a matching wheel. This was intimate proof. What? How my father whispered, not because he did not suspect, but because he now had to navigate the proof with the dignity of a man who needs to protect everything he has built. It's true, Madame Zhu said quietly, as if the admission was a relief and a chain. She hears. She has been listening. Jiang Yuan's face contorted into something that might have once been anger, but was now a frost of calculation. This is monstrous. She breathed. You've been intruding. You started it, I said. Not sorry for the honesty. You are always intruding into nursery secrets and letters. This is not immunity to curiosity. Her hand snapped forward before she knew she'd moved words like knives. You used the shield to take a man's tally, she accused. You put your hands into a messenger. Do you have any idea how dishonorable? How reckless? Yes, I answered. I do, but I did it because we would have been accused. I did it because a man was wearing your prince's colors, and a carriage hid a lie. I did it because I wanted to keep you all alive. That earned me a silence like a lit fuse. The family had always told stories about bravery and duty. Brave acts are honored in talis, but in houses where reputation is a currency, bravery that draws attention is an odd and dangerous beast. My father finally spoke, voice grieved, but practical. You saved us. You also exposed us. I thought of the emperor's pallor, and the physician's nod. I cannot pretend I don't have this ability, I said. But we can use it. Carefully. Using that word in that house made my mother squeeze my hand like it was a promise to a child. She believed in me, as mothers do, in the face of incomplete facts. My brothers shifted. Some looked ready to wheel me into weaponry. Some looked away. What the household could not reconcile in that hour was how public my knowledge could be. The regent had seen me help the emperor. The regent had seen the wheel sample. The regent had seen a man's name. The regent, cool, measured, careful, had already, in his way, decided to shield the minister from hasty punishment, while the investigation continued. Whether his shield would stretch to protect a daughter who heard thoughts was an open question. By morning, the story had slipped through the house and into the city like a rumor that wanted to be a fact. Servants whispered about the minister's daughter who had voice and ear for the unsaid. Courtiers moved like coyotes, sniffing. The second prince's retinue had been embarrassed and shorn of some of its secrecy, but that made them more dangerous rather than less. People who lose a covert game do not stop. They escalate. And then the doorbell of calamity. An anonymous letter slid under our gate with a blade of ink that read like a dare. It named the minister as suspect and hinted that the daughter, the witching child, had more allies in the palace than she would admit. The letter did not accuse directly. It was a suggestion. A needle meant to prick and pull. My father's shoulders buckled under a weight that was less about pride and more about the responsibility of being the family's axis. He looked at me, and in his face there was not only anger, but a raw, old fear. If this is true, he said slowly, it will change everything. People will either want us for our advantage or burn us for our difference. Then we must choose, Madame Zhu said. Simple as bread on a stone. Do we hide her and risk being crushed if discovered? Or do we make her usefulness undeniable enough that it outweighs the fear she causes? It is exhausting, how the weight of choices presses on small beings until they feel like mountains. I realized, in an odd burst of clarity, that my life had always been a litany of choices someone else made for me, chapter headings in a novel I had read for entertainment, and now it had become, painfully, my agency to wield. Use it wisely, the system prompted. System. Host points. 120. Suggestion. Formalize something. An arranged explanation. A public demonstration of loyalty. Note. Saitu, you may permit temporary protection at his residence. Saitu. You at his residence. The words floated like a tempting promise. Stay with the regent, be seen as under his patronage. The court will have to account for you with his presence, but it also meant being moved out of the family's center. It meant being a visible object of power. It was the kind of option that could save you by placing you in a gilded cage. We convened a family council because those in power always practice the comfortable illusion of deliberate My father spoke in measured tones. We will accept a temporary refuge offered by the regent, he said. And the room stiffened, like something being wounded. It is not surrender. It is a means of ensuring we can still govern. And you, daughter, will be under the regent's household, with his protection. Until this is resolved. I felt 1,000 motivations stutter in the room. Envy. Relief? Obligation? My mother's eyes, wet with a strange, brave pride. Jiang Yuan'er's mouth flattened into a line like someone who sees their ladder being moved. Lian's hand brushed mine with a secret hope. I wanted to say yes and shake my head no at the same time. But the choice was not mine wholly. It belonged to a father, balancing a realm. I bowed. If it keeps the household safe, I said, voice steady, I accept. Saitu, you received me with restraint that could be mistaken for gentle scolding. His residence smelled of cedar, and a kind of order I'd previously associated only with museums. He watched me settle in with the same quiet assessment he'd given me in the palace. Something like curiosity, something like calculation. You will be under my roof, he told me once we were alone in a small study lined with books and maps that did not belong to me but I coveted. That does not mean you are protected from consequences. It means you are under scrutiny that will aim to keep you alive as long as it serves the realm. Thanks, I tried for levity, and landed somewhere between a quip and a sob. Is that flattering? He cocked his head as if considering whether to humor my modern awkwardness. It is political efficiency. The corner of his mouth twitched, the smallest signal that perhaps he had no patience for flattery himself. Days unfurled in a stretch of quiet surveillance. I assisted physicians quietly, read maps, and listened where I could. I was kept busy enough to keep me from fretting myself into a spectacle. The system chirped, in measured intervals, offering suggestions and items in exchange for host points. Nothing that could freely alter fate, but things that could buy a minute of privacy, or a spare scarf when the night was cold. Yet exposure breeds curiosity. Even behind the regent's doors I began to feel the tug of interest. Courtiers sent polite visits. An envoy from the second prince's side arrived dripped in silken full suro to request a private word with my father, under the pretense of conciliation. It was the kind of sugar-coated approach that made me physically itch. And then, as if the world were a thread ready to be pulled, a new scandal slid into being. The emperor, stabilized but not well, declared a public inquest into his poisoning, not to punish just yet, but to strike at the rot he suspected in his court. Such an inquest is a blade disguised as justice. It would pull families into the light and make them stand like specimens. The morning of the inquest, rumors spun like birds. The city was full of them. Our household prepared. Like people setting a plate on a table. They hope isn't broken. Saitu, in a rare hint of softness, came to stand close enough that I could see the small scar at his knuckle, something that looked like the mark made by a life that had battered him into composure. You will present the evidence you have, he said, when we were alone, voice the kind that does not indulge in small talk. But be careful. Evidence is persuasive, but those who feel threatened by the unknown will react in extremes. I will keep 2 facts, I said. Footprints? Carriage? Jar? Medical report? The system offered a congratulatory chime, pleased with my choice. System, plus 30 host points, suggested item available for host points redemption. Discrete seal permits document. Authentication. At the inquest, the court filled with the kind of faces that either loved spectacle or feared it. There is no middle ground in such places. Lords, princes, and ministers gathered as if we were all a small tree, around which storms might gather. The Emperor Pella, and smaller but seated, listened like a machine tuned for betrayal. I sat near my father, my fists folded into my sleeves. We presented evidence, methodically. I described the footprints step by step. The physician explained the medicine composition and the anomaly. Lian testified about how she had seen the coat in the courtyard, and how she had pressed the cloth small. Brave things, that together made a ladder. The messenger's confession was brought forward, and the carriage was shown, with its hidden compartment. It was all methodical, the kind of thing that suggests a crime had illegal artistry. When, however, they called for witnesses of anything that suggested the daughter could see thoughts, the chamber went suddenly colder. You could see people recalibrate like chess players, realizing the board had a new piece. You are asking the court to accept that the minister's daughter can hear others' thoughts, the second prince's envoy said, in an elegant hiss. His words were carefully unmasked. The envoy smiled, which hid teeth the way polished daggers hide serration. You can ask, I said. The moment hung between an offer and a dare. The regent, looking over the court like a man making a careful map, granted a voice only when nothing else could be used as balm. Miss Jiang, he said, if you can demonstrate this ability, in a manner that does not infringe on privacy, let us not punish the impossible. Let us weigh it. It felt unreal, like a test I had not prepared for. To prove I could hear thoughts without violating privacy meant exposing the phenomenon, while demonstrating restraint. I closed my eyes for a second, and listened to the room. Thoughts came in shards: fear, hunger, a merchant calculating, a noble measuring games, the faint deviant thought of a man who liked to hide poison in elaborate ways. I began with simplicity. Steward, I said, and the steward's face immediately tightened. Think of the lad who borrowed your cup last week. He blinked. Then the memory of a small shame unrolled on his face. The court watched him, their faces draining like marble left in rain. It was a demonstration, not of the deepest secrets, but of the fact of my hearing. People are either impressed by proof, or horrified by it. The reaction is similar both. Make you a spectacle. Then, they demanded more. The second prince's envoy urged for a demonstration of my range. The court's appetite for certainty is a mouth that cannot be satisfied with small bites. I refused to read private life's deepest scars. I would not weaponize others' sorrow for acceptance. But they pushed and pushed until, with something like a calm I did not fully possess, I said, Regent, allow me to point out one small truth. The man who moved the giraffe, you ask him to remove his glove, his heel will carry a lotus mark. It was not a psychic trick, so much as a deduction turned public. But the man in Questona kitchen attendant went white. He glanced at the guards in a way that was entirely a confession. They removed his glove. The heel was not visible. His shoes were worn, but a pattern in the halls dust matched what I'd already shown. It was evidence enough to make a pivot. It made people uncomfortable. When the second prince's contingent began to rage, this is preposterous. The daughter is a charlatan. My family's reaction surprised me. My sister, Genuiner, rose to make a speech that was half defense, half attack. She argued that I might be honest but unstable, that people cannot be trusted with such power, that the minister had never told her of such things, because he did not want the household exploited. Her voice was razored and careful, and, for a heartbeat, I watched my father's eyes, which had that old hurt, like someone picking at a scab. I wanted to intervene, to tell them all that I had not chosen this, and I sought only to survive and to protect. To tell them the system was a ridiculous thing and I could not explain it without sounding mad. I did not speak. Instead, I let the evidence grow on its own like a plant in well-watered soil. And then, because the court likes drama as much as it likes law, someone in the second prince's circle, perhaps furious at losing their advantage, made a mistake. They called forth a eunuch from the prince's retinue to vouch for the prince's innocence. The eunuch was slight and silenced, with the practiced obedience of a man who learns to be invisible in a court by being useful. He turned, and a guard in the back hissed there. Near his collarbone, a scrap of cloth identical to the fabric found in the carriage compartment, evidence stacked like a guilty man's words. The court fractured into whispers and accusations. The regent's voice, when he spoke, was the kind of steady blade that promised consequences. Arrest anyone found to have transported the vial of medicine, he directed. We will determine whether the second prince's retinue acted alone or as part of a larger conspiracy. In the aftermath, the second prince's face, which had held the smugness of secret ambition, took on an expression of thin control and anger. He left the hall with the poise of a man whose plans had been exposed, and who would now reroute, like a caged tiger. That night, people in the mansion were more guarded. We were no longer merely a family with secrets. We were a family whose secrets had been broadcast and catalogued by a court that had seen proof. The emotions were scrambled. Protection from certain quarters, fear from others. Lian came to me with eyes, like a person who had seen an impossible miracle, and could not sleep. They will try to use you, she said, fingers twisting in her sleeves. They will either keep you close, or punish you. Madame Zhu, so practical, always, fed the staff, and then set them to cleaning the courtyard, and inventorying jewelry like someone preparing to be robbed. We will be ready, she said. We will make sure you are a net, not a target. My father, who'd have been so proud, wore the exhaustion of a man who had been building a house, and found out the foundation might be made of shifting sand. He came to my room at night, and sat in the lamplight as if trying to read a book whose pages were blank. Daughter, he said, voice unadorned, I owe you more than a word. You saved me. You saved this house. But do you know what it means to the minister to be under the eye of the emperor? Yes, I said. I had a modern vocabulary for guilt and duty, and it fit oddly with the historical weight of his fear. Aïe. Du, you must learn to be seen not as a spectacle but as a safeguard, he said. Make allies. Let the regent vouch. Make your usefulness clear. And your concealments. He faltered, choosing the word slowly. Controlled. Controls, and usefulness. I made lists, like a miser hoards coins. I practiced the face of a woman who had control when I wanted to be invisible, and control when I wanted to be useful. The family did the tidy, pragmatic things. Moving valuables, counting silver, practicing statements. In the days that followed, a new pattern formed. The family began to treat me with something complicated and layered. Gratitude, fear, opportunism. Jiang Yuan's glare became more precise, like a woman who had decided to thread her own ambitions through the new pattern. My brothers alternated between jealously wanting to use me, and protecting the roof over our heads. There was a private moment, however, that made my chest ache with a strange hope. Saitiu, who had the diplomatic restraint of a man who rarely let his face betray anything, entered my temporary quarters in the regent's residence with 2 cups of tea. The room smelled of cedar and paper. He set a cup before me, and the steam curled like a small, gray question. You have shifted things, he said plainly, watching me as someone who had learned to read a weapon's balance from its hilt. But you have also attracted attention. Is that a compliment? I tried, and failed, to make my voice sound anything but wry. He allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. His was not a smile for warmth, but for acknowledgement. It's a conditional compliment. You did what was necessary. We sat in silence, like neighbors who had both survived a storm. He drank his tea with the slowness of someone who tasted the world at a measured pace. Are you afraid? he finally asked, which is the sort of question men of his kind ask because it's efficient to know what someone fears. Sometimes, I admit, mostly I'm tired, I woke up in the wrong chapter. That will make you useful, he said. And his voice contained something like agreement. Then, slightly more private, do not mistake my attention for affection. Good, I said, because I am not yet a person who should be loved without terms. He fixed me, with a look that was not unkind. We have a long war of whispers ahead. I will not call it affection, but I will watch you, the way I would watch a nascent army. Those words felt like the start of something we would both build. Protector. Ally. Something unspoken and valuable. And yet, the game was not done. The second prince would not accept this publicly staged failure. Secrets that are threatened become violent. A week later, late and crooked like a thread, a small group of masked men tried to break into the steward's stores, and seized a chest that contained letters and a small ledger. They fled, but not before one was captured. Under questioning, he confessed that a ring of men had been paid by an unknown patron to gather intelligence on houses suspected of harboring potential regent allies. The ledger pointed to payments and discussions that twisted toward the minister's name. Power wants to be greedy. The second prince wanted to push us off the board. We were ready. Not triumphantly so. No one in our house was arrogant enough to assume we had won anything but prepared in the bone, like men who have learned to brace for storms. The family pivoted to protect and adapt. The council in which we presented the intercepted ledger was like a theater of careful eyes. The regent sighed too. He displayed an odd warmth in his presentation of the facts, tinged with the faintest hint of ownership. In light of these attempts, he said in a voice that made courtiers reassess their positions as if forced into obedience, we will secure those families exposed to attack and examine who arranged this. To be secured by the regent is both blessing and confinement. Meaningful protection has strings. Being under someone's shadow means you cannot move beyond their light without permission. Yet in the present moment, it was what kept our family from being pulled apart. After the council, the family gathered in a small courtyard, less formal than the halls, but still full of the way a house makes its definitions. I watched them interact, some with fresh suspicion, some with gratitude, all with a layered complexity that made me feel simultaneously foreign and central. Leon offered me tea, smiling like someone who had taken a small yet defiant stand for loyalty. Madame Zhu rolled her eyes at the ministrations of lesser worried relatives, and then took my father aside to discuss mundane things like mortgage and grain. That is how people resume life after disasters, by focusing on the next practical thing. Zhang Yuaner lingered. However, she came to stand across from me, closer than politeness required, and further than family custom allowed, and said a thing that both stunned and hurt. You could have told me, she said softly, as if the single demand was the only currency she had to spend. I started, then stopped. You needed to be safe, I said instead. I didn't want to put you in a place where you could be used or coerced. Her eyes were something like a sculpture of hurt and calculation. You took something from me, she said, the attention I trained my whole life for. Now you take the regent's notice, and I am left to salvage what I can. I didn't want that, I said. I wanted to survive. I wanted the family to survive. I didn't pick a side. She tilted her head. Then don't expect me to embrace you for it. We had all traded in betrayals by that point, small ones, ugly ones, survivals. The family's discovery of my secret had peeled layers of our relationships like onion skin. There was now a new architecture to our house. Rooms of gratitude, corridors of suspicion, and a stairwell that led to something like usefulness. That night, alone in my small quarters at the Regent's, I listened to the system tick, its little thoughtful sounds, and imagined a path forward. The system had been useful eavesdrops, shields. Talzand had not been a god, it had been a tool, sometimes comical, sometimes incisive. Its presence made the world smaller in ways I did not always like, and it kept offering items that would let me trade points for small comforts, and small advantages. System. Reminder. Host points. 280. New items available. 1 quiet seal for anonymous messages. 2 minor concealment cloth for hiding small items in plain sight. Cosmetic. Points are just numbers, until you need to hide a thing in plain sight. The ledger. The carriage. The medicinal. These were small victories stitched into a larger pattern. We had secured a reprieve. We had an ally in sight. We were no longer alone, but the second prince and his contingent had been embarrassed. And those who taste blood do not easily forgive. The next chapter, whatever it was, would likely be less about clandestine theft, and more about finding the weak angles in our armor. I had, in the midst of this, discovered something else. That being hated one moment could quickly become being desired. The next, when power perceives you can be useful, it does not only fear you, it wants you. The family that once wanted me dead now looked at me like a commodity to be preserved. A strange melange of gratitude and calculation. Tonight, beneath the regent's roof, with the candle guttering and the system humming like a small, knowing friend, I realized how thin the line was between being sheltered and being a spectacle. System. Objective update. Protect family and reveal conspirators. Danger, high, but manageable. Suggestion. Cultivate court allies, and keep Lian and Madame Zhu close. Reminder. 1 restart per arc. Remain Sues with caution. 1 distato per arc. The system's little mercy was a relic of a world where you could rewind mistakes. I had nearly exhausted miracles, and felt both comforted by that last safety net, and alarmed by its existence. We had postponed doom. We had not defeated it. The second prince's anger had become an ache in the city, and his retinue would have reasons to keep probing. I found myself thinking, not for the first time, of the novel's pacing where villains often returned worse, and the heroine discovered that each victory invited a next, sharper conflict. Outside the regent's courtyard that night, a wagon rolled past, its lanterns muted with speed. A shadow in its wake hurled a small, folded scrap that landed at the house's gate. It contained nothing but an emblem and a single line of ink. You may have raw ears, minister. Use them wisely, or lose them. The second prince's seal. Threats are courteous in their cruelty. They announce themselves with the etiquette of one who wants you to know you are being toyed with. The family's response would need to be slow and deliberate. We could not act rashly. Rashness is the friend of those with fewer scruples. In the morning, the regent called for a private conversation. The way he arranged himself, in his study books, maps, the economy of his movements felt like it was designed to measure the weight of a man's character. He looked at me like one measures good soil for planting. You have value, he said, blunt and almost tired.